that footage felt like I was with him, you know, and the
Very
audience
much
that
so.
you get to see, you get a peek into his where his priorities were, the sort of layers and masks that he wears. You know, there's times in that footage where he's a reality star.
Yeah.
So he knows how to play to the camera.
Yep.
There's moments where, because he's so used to filming himself, I'm just talking, you know, it doesn't matter if I'm exposing myself in ways that maybe I wouldn't publicly, because I'll just cut that out later.
Yeah.
And then there's moments where I think he forgets that the camera is there that are really, you know, to me quite disturbing. That footage, it sort of reinforced a lot of like what people were talking about.
Yes.
When they were trying to explain him.
How did you approach this material? Because obviously, Sean Combs is someone we all know. You know, so taking that subject matter on.
Well, I also thank you guys for hanging out with us on a Saturday night at the
Yeah.
Grove for film, and thank you, Film Independent, for putting all this together. But I grew up as a fan. You know, the Bad Boy soundtrack was the soundtrack of my high school years. Growing up in Texas, I was a very big, you know, hip hop fan, and it was my entree into New York hip hop, because Southern hip hop is very different. I moved to New York when I was 17. You know, that was sort of the late 90s, and, you know, it was like Bad Boy, Damon Dash with Rockefeller. I mean, it was a whole scene, and all of these people were very accessible and around, and I had friends that worked at their companies, and so I never worked for Sean. However, you know, people would talk about, you know, things, and it was a pre-Me Too era as well, and so, you know, there were some bad deeds that you would hear about, but it was sort of, unfortunately, in our society, it was sort of like it just came with the territory, and so when Cassie's lawsuit dropped, that was like a light bulb went on in my head, because we had obviously gone through a big Me Too movement, but I feel like in the space of hip hop, you know, as a Black person in this country, like where was the Me Too, you know, what was this world going to be like?
Right.
And I thought that the details of the specifics that Cassie went into with her allegations and that lawsuit were you know, pretty jaw-dropping. And then it was even more curious because 24 hours later she settled, and it's sort of like boop. And I was, you know, I got the bug then. I was like, I want to get under the hood, and I really want to try to see like what might I be able to uncover.
And for me, with watching especially the first episode, so much goes into how he became who he was, which I was fascinated by because I didn't know that. So, I mean, and I love that that's where you started, is how, you know, I'm always interested as a storyteller, how do you become the person that you are? You know.
Yeah, well, with the series, when I started trying to prep it and write it, you know, because there is a part of that you do with docs, even though you're finding the story and things are unfolding in real time, I knew that, you know, for me in all my work, there's a few things as a storyteller that are key. A is origin story.
Yes.
You know, how did we get here?
Yeah.
And to me, that's everything.
Yes.
The second most important thing, especially with docs, is a timeline. Staying true to the timeline, not putting your opinion into things or what you think might have happened, but really just like creating a timeline that is based in facts. And because there were so many allegations and there were so many people now talking for the first time, getting their timelines, matching up his timeline, and sort of like figuring out his journey, and, you know, like how does this even happen? And then the last thing that I do with a lot of my work, and this is more of the investigative journalism component to it, is follow the money.
Yes.
And so all of those three things are sort of my North Stars,
Yes.
and were really important, you know, in putting this together.
That is so interesting, because one of the things to me about your work is seeing both sides of an issue. Like you as a documentarian, you know, you don't come in knowing what the story is going to be. You have to find the story. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, like there's you can sort of try to put an outline together.
Yeah.
With things that, like when you have the timeline, then my first step is always timeline, and then figuring out how many episodes I have, and sort of like trying to figure out, okay, I'm not going to do a cradle to now story.
Right.
So where can I, start? And trying to figure out how I'm going to get in and out of each episode, so that because I love peeling back the onion, peeling back the layers.
Yeah, that's what I'm always interested in, is I think it's one thing, but then what are we actually revealing? And, how much of this did you actually shoot? Like, how does it break down? I know some of the footage was... Yes, and how did that happen, and what you actually shot in terms of the balance between that?
So all of the interviews that you saw with the like Kirk, Joy, people that worked with him, that was all original footage for us.
So with Andre?
With Andre, no, Andre passed away.
Oh, he did, of course, of course.
And so that was all archival. The really interesting thing about putting this together, and it's always, it becomes harder in the edit, but we had great editors and we had an amazing archival team. Sean had thousands of hours of footage because he filmed himself all of the time. And so there was almost like too much for us to even like go through, but we did. And so there was all of that footage, and then you've got like, the big highlight moments, and then you have all the music video, just so much stuff that there was a whole team working on that. We had like 2 people per episode and like 1 lead archivist. So there's a whole like team of archival producers like going through all of that footage. And then it becomes sort of like a war room. It's like, okay, the archival team, they're finding things that the editors need to support and so it's sort of this
weaving of almost
weaving
like
of
a
all
quilt.
those things.
Yeah.
And then there's the footage that Sean was very upset about, or his team was very upset that that we had.
But clearly he was in it.
He was in
so
it. He was filming himself.
Yeah.
Or had someone filming him in his last days leading up to his arrest. But we were already well deep into the edit.
Right.
So I didn't have that when I started, and it wasn't like, oh, I got this footage and now let me make a documentary around it. I got that, and it was actually like, crap, like, what do I do with this?
Oh, because my goodness. So you were putting this together and did not have that footage.
Right. And it was sort of like a quagmire of like, how do we make it work? How do we spread it across episodes? And so what I felt like was sort of like a, like I wanted an interview with Sean, and his team knew that, and I tried,
and that was going to be my next question.
Yes.
Would he sit down with you?
No, it never manifested into anything.
Yeah.
However, that footage I felt like I was with him, and the
Very
audience
much
that
so.
you get to see, you get a peek into his where his priorities were, the sort of layers and masks that he wears. There's times in that footage where he's a reality star.
Yeah.
So he knows how to play to the camera.
Yep.
There's moments where, you could tell, like, because he's so used to filming himself, I'm just talking, it doesn't matter if I'm exposing myself in ways that maybe I wouldn't publicly, because I'll just cut that out later.
Yeah.
And then there's moments where I think he forgets that the camera is there that are really, to me, quite disturbing. There's one moment in the open where he's talking to his attorneys, and it didn't work out where we were able to put this moment in there, but he's sitting, here, speakerphone, talking to his attorneys. The camera is over there, so who's holding the camera is over there. And he's like, like talking and upset and very animated, and then he does this to the guy who's holding the camera, and
because the angle is not a good angle.
Because for whatever reason, either get closer.
Oh.
Can you hear? I don't know. But that's Sean.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And so just when you think that you understand, or it's like you can never really believe what's happening like right in front of you. And I think that's what makes him very complicated. And I think that footage sort of became the like real version of, it sort of reinforced a lot of like what people were talking about when they were trying to explain him.
I mean, that footage is extraordinary. Yeah. So he was someone that filmed himself all the time.
Yeah, for decades.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not really that. I mean, that's very much a thing with like a lot of people in hip hop. You know, like that's culturally a thing. Sean probably takes it to like,
to another level. Of that.
But he also had, he was a reality star, and he reinvented himself as someone, as one of the early pioneers in that space.
Absolutely.
And so I think that, and now we live in a culture where we all live in public, or so many people are just constantly filming themselves. And I think that's
did
just
that
a part
a long
of
time before it became what everyone's doing all the time, living their life in public. Yeah. Were there any huge surprises, or what were the huge surprises in this project for you?
Huge surprises. There were moments in the footage that I with those last days that I found to be that hurt, like sometimes like hurt my heart, I guess is like a good way
I felt
to
that
say
with
it,
watching it.
like, and there's a moment where I really wanted to also interview his kids, and I was very interested in their relationship and what he was like as a father. There's obviously a great deal of love and support that I think those kids have for him. There's a moment in the bathroom where like his world is sort of crashing down in like real time, and there was a former artist of his that was suing him, and it felt very interesting because it felt like it nicked him. I don't think that there's a lot that can actually where he's like really, you see that this was not, that this really got to him, and sort of like that whole night and evening of how he was dealing with it, and then it just felt like it was a lot for him. And then Justin is in the bathroom and sort of like also, I can only imagine, freaking out, about all of this, and is not equipped. He's not media trained like his father. And when Sean was like, you do what you got to do. And I was like, that is such a, as a parent, and it's a moment where like not a lot of people talk about that moment, but I'm just like, most parents, if you have all this stuff swirling around you, it just was interesting that his kids were like in it with him, and like his soldiers, or I don't know what the right term is, that they were just like around for all of that. And I thought that was really interesting. And I felt for them, thought it was a really interesting dynamic.
Listen, he is a huge, iconic, important figure. So, this is a very tragic story, on so many levels.
It's tragic. It's, like Greek mythology, flying too close to the sun, whatever you...
For the women, then
the victims, it's sort of like, that was also probably a really big surprise to understand the levels of like how people were coping with their own story. And so it was interesting to sit with people like someone like Kirk, who you meet in the first episode, and his story continues to unfold, and it gets really dark. And but throughout it, he's such a peaceful, Zen-like person. I mean, the interviews with him, he was so calm and so measured, and also still really loved Sean, and really respected so much that they created together. But it's like he was at peace in a way, I think emotionally, with everything that went down. And then as you go through the series, you meet other people that are still in conflict, maybe denial, don't really have like that resolution. There's also a trial that is happening, like IRL, like while we were making this. And so it was really chaotic. It was really crazy. But it was interesting to see the different layers of how people were dealing with processing what Sean may or may not have done to them. And I think that in the last episode, there's a former artist, an artist who's a former bandmate of his, Kalina Harper, who, like, while we're interviewing, she's sort of putting things together in real time. And it was just mind-blowing to me to, like, see that people were figuring out how they might have been manipulated, and didn't even understand.
Weren't aware of it. And also some of the business practices. I mean,
Sean didn't invent the bad music industry for bad practices. If I had more time and more resources, when going into the origin of things, I really wanted to zoom out to understand the relationship with, the mob going to day one with record labels, and it's sort of the foundation of the music industry and how precarious like that is. And so Sean learned, how to do a lot of what he did. Now, what made him a unicorn, or what made him very different, was that Sean also wanted to be, like, in the limelight as an artist.
Yes, he was doing both.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting. How was 50 Cent involved with this? Like, what was that working relationship like?
So 50 and I already were working on some things in the documentary space prior to any of this happening, but prior to Cassie dropping her lawsuit. And when she dropped her lawsuit, and then she settled,
right.
And then it was sort of like, okay, where do I even start to try to unearth, more about the story?
Yeah.
I talked to 50. We had a conversation. 50 was also posting at that time a lot about him, that he was going to do a documentary. And so I called him, and we were talking, and I was like, I think that maybe we could work together to figure this out. So we had a long conversation about, what I wanted to follow. He definitely has his own stories, his own personal stories with Sean. That we were I was clear, that was never going to be a part of this story. It wasn't about, like, let's examine what you went through with Diddy. But what 50 provided at that time, because we also started before Sean was indicted. So he was, he was a free man doing whatever he wanted.
Right.
And a lot of people were afraid. And 50, I think, offered some peace of mind that, like, another big giant in the hip hop space
right.
was an EP on this. And I think that a lot of people felt like safe to talk, and safe that, even on the basic level of, like, I wasn't going to take their stories and give them to Sean,
Right.
And so I think
that's so interesting, because he is another giant in that world.
Yeah.
So for him to be part of this.
Yeah. And, like with docs, when you go to, if you're an American going and doing a documentary about some sort of bad actors in Russia, or not that we can do that in today's world, but wherever, you're going to some other country, or you're entering into another land, to unpack something, you want someone that holds weight in that community
in the world,
to
absolutely.
help, kind of get people to help let people know this is going to be authentic.
Right.
And I think people were actually more surprised when it came out, and it actually wasn't like a hit piece. It wasn't I think, what people thought it was going to be. So anyway, that was the relationship, and I'm very grateful to him for working on it.
And also for him to take it on with you and support you to tell the story.
Yeah, I think he knew, also been doing this for 20-something years. And so it was also, like, people seeing past work and understanding, like, how I would try to deal with these really sensitive, topics. And we had a lot of rules on this show. I never told anyone else who was participating, which is...
See, that's so interesting, to be protecting the people that you're interviewing, so they feel safe to be able to be honest with you.
Yeah, because people did not, that was a security, like, people's own, not, just like their peace of mind that their business wasn't going to be everywhere until this film came out. They wanted that protection. And so that was a very big deal. And it was a sort of a code a code of silence. And we kept a very tight team. I had an incredible team making this. We worked day and night for 2 years. every day.
I was going to ask, how long did
2
it?
long years.
2 years.
Yeah,
Wow.
2 years, and like literally, it felt like no days off, and everyone worked so hard, and I think you can see it in the film. These are all craftsmen in what they do, and so I'm happy that it got the audience that it did.
Yes.
But I'm not, it's like always weird as a documentary filmmaker who does dark stuff. Like, I'm not happy that this happened, but I'm happy that a lot of these voices, these victims, who were never taken seriously,
Right.
never
be
allowed,
heard.
can be
Yeah.
heard. And they also found a community with each other too,
Yeah.
because they were so siloed, over the years. So
Did you feel like when you talk about security around them, how have you felt about that?
I'm good. I feel good.
You've dealt with all kinds of
I've dealt
material
with,
in your
I have
career.
another
I
film
mean, you're a
about Brittany
journalist.
Griner, and
Yeah.
it's like, I'm, like talking, there's some stuff that's not so great about Putin in Russia.
Yeah, Putin
So-
in Russia might be a little more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a part. It comes with the job. Like,
Yeah.
I think that I of course in moments that was I was definitely concerned, but whenever I feel that way, I just kind of remember what the people who participated, in this, what they were facing, and
Yeah.
some of the backlash that they were receiving, and that kind of pales in comparison. So.
And were there any, because I know we have to close, I got the little signal from above. Was there any big surprise that you found as a result of this? Did it go in the direction you had anticipated in the beginning, or what was revealed in the process? I know that's probably a big question, but.
I think I really, there's so much that is not included in the film,
Yeah.
and that happens with docs. There's a lot on a cutting room floor. I really wanted to get into more about his childhood.
Yeah.
Where he went to high school. There's some, guys that are a part of his early story, besides Tim Dog, who you meet here, who I was really curious about, and I thought that would actually probably provide a lot more color, to his story and his journey. I also felt like what I wasn't able to completely get answers to it was like the larger ecosystem that was allowing him to continue on with this behavior. And I think that we are living in a time right now where we see lots of parallel. There's a lot of bad actors,
Right.
and so I keep telling everyone, I'm like, this is just the beginning. I think this is really the beginning of further examination into this. But, Sean is one person.
Yes.
For all of this to happen the way it did, you got to ask yourself,
You have to.
who else?
Who are the people around that allowed that to? I mean, you can't help but think about Weinstein. I mean, the big circle that surrounds this that stayed silent.
Absolutely.
I mean, it wasn't just one person.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
As a we're both, it's like New York, former New Yorkers.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot about these New Yorkers that came up in an era and that, subscribe to the same sort of ethos of like how to, muddy the waters of what you're really doing, use entertainment to present a version of yourself.
Yeah.
And here's the deals in the background. And if people get hurt along the way, not a lot of empathy for people. So I think that, this is called The Reckoning, but I think we're in the midst of like a larger reckoning.
I mean, this is how we're living right now. It feels like it resembles the bigger world that we're all functioning in.
And
Yeah.
I think the biggest takeaway, and we talked a lot about this in the edit, and I think my biggest lesson for what I personally took away is that, I'm following the story of Sean Combs. However, I think the bigger question here and the bigger lens here is that this series should be a mirror to us
Yes.
as people. What do we allow people to get away with in plain sight? And so I think that that's really where the conversations I hope continue or grow into is like, we all have to ask ourselves, like, what
do
we allow, as people that are.
What a perfect way to end this conversation, because that is something I always, I want to believe that if the bombs start dropping now, I will save us all. I will be a hero. But I don't know that. I've never been tested in that way. So it does come back in some way to your own personal responsibility.
We have a social responsibility.
We do.
We have individual responsibilities, but we also have responsibilities as people who live in community with each other, for now, to be a little bit more tactful and responsible, and maybe not, I think, and you'll see if you continue to watch the series, I interviewed jurors from his trial in the last episode. And I did one of those interviews 24 hours after the verdict came in. And it was really interesting. And that's where I really started. The film was teaching me something. And it was like, wow, the power of celebrity, the power of like who, we need to be very careful as to who we worship and idolize.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my God, Alex, thank you. That was awesome.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you all.